I'd like to think that'll be buried in this. Hopefully not anytime soon, but there better be a big grave to put us both in it. I'm Graham, I drive a 1974 Chevrolet Camaro. We're currently in Ravenworks, which is a friend's unit, where most of the work gets done to the car. When I pulled up to the car park to look at this car, it was soaked in rainwater, so you couldn't really see the paint very well. I could see that the windows weren't closed properly, I could see that the interior was pretty much missing. I could tell that the car had been warmed up to temperature. It was difficult to sort of gauge how much of a project it was. We got talking to the guy Dave that sold me it. He'd imported it from America. I think he'd come from Florida at the time. And he bought it as a personal car. He said it was a numbers matching Z28. Told me a lot of the problems that it had, but I guess in a typical kind of salesman way, played some of them down, didn't mention some of the others, but maybe he didn't know about. And I figured it was a project I could take on, so yeah, paid the deposit, and then about a week later I was driving home from work and just happened to pass it on the A1 on the way home, and I giggled like a little girl all the way home. I couldn't believe I'd bought this old muscle car. Yeah, so I had an RX-7 for about 6 years. I bought it as a birthday gift to myself when I was about 24. And I've always had old Japanese sports cars, so I figured that was going to be my car for life. I'd wanted one since I was about 8 years old. Took 6 years building it, made it look like a Spirit R, black, beautiful thing. And then my dad lives on his own in Scarborough, and every year I drive up to see him and take him a Christmas dinner that I've cooked. And I got there really quickly one year, and I got a bit of a bollocking off my dad for getting there so quickly. He knew I'd been speeding all the way up. So he gave me a dressing down, made me feel like a little boy again. So on the way home I thought I'd drive really slowly, and weirdly enough it actually saved my life. I had a tyre failure at about 40 miles an hour in a straight line, put me straight into a barrier and wrote the car off. And my mental health suffered quite a lot after that. I wanted, you know, the car for me is a big part of my personality. I like the escape of driving. And at the time I was shooting cars for Bennett Motorsport and Performance. He builds supercharged S550 Mustangs among other things. So he sort of scumbagged me into buying one. And obviously he wanted me to buy one so he could supercharge it for me. But yeah, when I started looking at them and I sort of saw the price they were going for, when you start looking for a car, I think it's a bit like when you buy one, you realise that everyone else has bought one as well. There were S550s everywhere. And alright, not many people had supercharged them, they're a good platform, but I didn't want a car that everybody else had got. And for the same money you could get a classic, so I started looking at 68 coupes. Fastback's already out of my price range by then. I did want a shark nose, but because John Wick had been out previously, the shark noses became more expensive. So yeah, I started looking at 68 fastbacks, test drove a couple. There's a really nice one locally, but it was a little bit more money than I could afford. I think if it had been a bit cheaper, I probably would be sat in a Mustang now. But just that kind of deliberation over whether I could really afford it or not allowed this to come up for sale in the meantime, and it was a third of the price. So yeah, I drove down to Derby to look at it, didn't know anything about it, didn't know anything about Camaros, didn't know the differences between the models, didn't really know what Z28 meant. And yeah, I pulled up, it was absolutely pissing it down with rain. The car had been run up to temperature, which is always shady. But it just looked so cool in this car park that I couldn't resist it. We set about essentially making it safer and more reliable, because it pretty much every time I drove it when I first bought it back then, it broke down. So I took it to Bennett Motorsport Performance, and I felt awful because he'd got all these really nice new Mustangs and, you know, a couple of McLarens and that sort of thing, and my car just looked like a bag of shit in his workshop. But I couldn't change gear. I was having some gearbox problems, and I thought it might have been the gearbox itself. And that's where I really got introduced to Josh. I've been really lucky that Josh is so meticulous with his work. He's taken a lot of time out and come round to my house in the garage, and you know, we've been up till 4 in the morning on quite a few occasions. It's kind of been a process of elimination that as the car's broken, we fixed it. It started with the fuel system. We had a holiday to Rome, for 4 days, me and my girlfriend, and when we got back, I'd brimmed the tank before I left, and when I got back I could smell fuel from the side of the road. I opened the garage door to about an inch of petrol. It turns out a seam weld had failed halfway up the tank when I filled it up, and it had 4 days of just seeping out of it. So we replaced the tank. We then went through the fuel lines because they were the next dangerous step in the process. We replaced the inline filter, which was a factory spec glass one. We replaced it with a metal inline filter. We put in a fuel pressure regulator so we could see what pressure was coming out of the fuel pump, which is a good job we did because it turned out it was knackered, so we then replaced the fuel pump. And we were chasing a misfire for quite a while, so then we went through the electrics and then went through the carburetor. Josh went through the differential. It had 373 gears from the factory, which is really snappy. It's built for kind of traffic light racing, but on the motorways over here where the speed limit's a lot higher, it was awful to drive. So when we go on a long distance drive, I had to sit at 55, so we've put 342 gears in it. The diff's been rebuilt, so now it locks properly. All the bottom end has been polybushed. The leaf springs have been refurbished. We went through the suspension. It's got Kona Classic shocks on it, Hotchkiss 2-inch lowering springs at the front, polybush drop links as well. Carbon ceramic brake pads, just because they were the most expensive thing that I could buy, and they were 32 quid. When I put carbon ceramic brake pads in my RX-7, they were 500 quid. But yeah, carbon ceramic pads in this were 32 quid. So the whole car's been restored on a budget of maybe £3,500 for a car that barely ran to a car that it'll never be a show winner, but you know, as a rolling sort of tribute to a muscle car. £3.5 grand's not a lot of money to spend. I've built a really strong relationship with this car because every time something breaks, you get to know its character a little bit more. But the thing that I'm most grateful for is the fact that through the time I spent with Josh, we became really close. I've realised that me and Josh have actually got a lot in common. We're both of a similar age. We've both got a bit of a past with mental health issues, and we started to support one another. And we thought, do you know what, there's probably other people out there that are like us. Like, we both like cars, but we'd both stopped going to car shows and car meets because cars for us they're not an object of status, we just like driving them. So we figured, well, if we've got this in common, we might find other people, and we spoke about setting up a car club. And that's how I met Rick in the unit that we're in now. We came down for his open day just by chance the day after. And yeah, I think within a week we'd found about 12 or so people that all felt the same way. So Ravenworks it started as a powder coating business, and I don't actually have anything to do with Ravenworks. So Rick, Nick and Eddie are three friends that decided they wanted a space to work on cars together essentially. They came upon it by chance. The chap owner at the time just happened to be at a stage in his life where he contemplated selling it, and quite cheap as well. So the guys put together, took on the powder coating business, decided to tidy the place up. And for them it was just a place away from home where they could work on the cars together and work on the projects together. I don't think I'm out of turn saying this, that the club coming along has kind of kick-started their vision. Their ultimate vision for the business was to be a car restoration shop. But I think they would have for a while probably plodded on with doing powder coating. The fact that we brought these projects to them, Josh especially is a bad influence. They very quickly went and bought a whole pack of muscle cars that are in all sorts of states of disrepair. And it's given them a long-term goal to work towards, and the kind of work that's attracted since. We talk a lot around here about manifestation, and I know it's a bit of a hipster buzzword at the minute, but it's weird how things have just appeared in our laps. That 10 years ago I would have killed to be in this position, and now it's just a Friday night and we're just hanging around. And yeah, the club and the business have grown hand in hand, and it's sprouted other businesses. Josh now runs his own business, which is called Blackstar Motorsport. We now work with Shane over at STG Performance, which is a name I've heard of around here for years, but never got the chance to speak to him. Shane's built all the exhaust on my car and on Rick's Mustang. His work's exceptional. We have Ollie, who runs Godspeed. He does design work and fabrication. Ollie's done the splitter on the front there. Yeah, we've got obviously Ben I spoke about earlier over at EDA, renowned engine builder, has been in the game probably since he was a little boy. You know, his dad did it before that. EDA have got a really big name in the muscle car world. And yeah, now he's just Ben who hangs around at the club. So the way that everything's fed, and we also work with Motorsport Performance as well. So yeah, the way that everything's fed into one another, it's just snowballing, and we're not quite sure where it's going to end up at the minute. I remember when forums were king, long before Facebook and social media, and they were a really great way of documenting information. And I'm aware this sounds like a plug for PistonHeads, but really it should be, because working on these old cars, you know, a lot of the information gets lost over the years. You can't find it on Facebook groups. You know, if you're asking a question, you're relying on an algorithm to let somebody see it. on an old school forum, it's just there, and you know, we're looking for really obscure information from a time that's long since gone, and forums have been the way to find information. So selfishly for me, it's a good way of archiving what I've done to the car, and if we've had to reface a problem, we can go back and look at the problems we faced and think, oh, do you know what, I remember that now, there's a better way of doing this. So forums are brilliant for that, and for me at least, social media will never replace that. So I'm wearing a long sleeve top today, you can't really see it, but I have a sleeve full of tattoos. And they're all skulls, which looks a bit morbid, and people think it's to look aggressive, which it's not. They're all actually like near-death incidents in my life, so there's things on there like times I've been really depressed and I want to commit suicide, there's times in there I've had car accidents. There's something about skulls that's always spoken to me. I guess that there's probably something philosophical in it somewhere about how we're all the same. And kind of naturally translated to the car, you know, the car is an old kind of rock and roll thing. I guess skulls again are a big theme of rock and roll. And the Day of the Dead thing just seemed to fit really well. I had a hole where the stereo should be that I didn't want to replace because I can't hear it anyway. So yeah, I put in I guess influenced by old LA sort of lowriders. There's a bandana around the steering column. I actually like riding in the car with my dog. I've got a husky called Amber, she saved my life. So when I take her in the car, I put the same bandana around her, which is probably a little bit cheesy, but it's quite nice. It makes me feel good when I'm driving the car, and she loves it as well. So yeah, it's not like when I started I was like, I'm going to have to put this on, but things have kind of naturally progressed, and I guess it's just got little bits of my character in it. You know, there's a tequila pistol bottle that's used as a coolant overflow. Again, I guess that's kind of a nod to my sort of ex-forces background, the fact that I like firearms and that sort of thing, and I love old films, so yeah, you know, things like Bullet and Mad Max, like I've always wanted, I guess, a car that looks like a film star. And the Camaro, the day I laid eyes on it, it didn't look like a muscle car, it looked like a sort of Detroit land yacht, but I could see it's got potential, like the body lines in it and everything. There's an artistry to the way it's designed that I don't think you get from a Mustang, or, you know, from a lot of cars in the 70s especially. And yeah, like I think it's finally starting to look the part. It looks like it could be a villain's car in a film. If you want to read the rest of the build thread, please click the link in the description, and while you're there, why not start your own?
That was good.
That was alright?
That was good, yeah.